This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. My name is Maxine Bell, and I am delighted to introduce you to a new series, A Day in the Life of. These podcast episodes will be released between our longer themed podcast series that you are already used to. We've been interviewing coaches for a while now under the theme A Day in the Life of for our LinkedIn newsletter, and they were so well received we wanted to offer them to a broader audience. The interviews are with real, everyday coaches across the globe from all walks of life who join me to honestly and bravely share their journeys into coaching, how they coach and run their business, what they love and what their challenges are, as well as how they integrate self-care into their practice. It's a real honour to get a sneak peek into their lives, and we hope that listening to their stories will inspire, encourage and assist you, whatever stage of your coaching journey you are on. Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Day in the Life series. And with me today I have the wonderful Helen O'Grady. Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's so lovely to be here, Maxine. I'm really excited and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you for giving your time today. So let's dive right in. Would you like to tell people a little bit about your current coaching practice, what you do?
So I coach and I'm a coach supervisor. So my coaching, I'm a leadership coach and I specialise really in health, social care and education. So I coach in those sectors mostly. And as a coach supervisor, I'm really focused on helping coaches again from that background feel like and increase their professionalism. And really that's about helping them feel they're good enough, because I think that's something that we all struggle with as a coach of, are we good enough? And so that's what my supervision practice is focused on. So they're the main things I'm juggling at the moment. I also do some mentor coaching and I teach coaching skills again in health and social care and education as well. So lots of different things. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, kind of coaching spectrum.
Yes, exactly.
Of different roles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brought you into coaching? What was your journey? Because I'm just wondering what brought you to that particular niche, that sort of area that you're interested in. So tell us a little bit about your journey into coaching.
My professional background, which probably explains my niche, is as a paediatric nurse. So I trained as a paediatric nurse and nursed both here and actually in Australia for a long time as well. I'm married to an Australian, so we lived in Australia. And so I was happy. I loved being a nurse. It was a great career. I felt very privileged to be a paediatric nurse. And then, like many people, started having children. And obviously working those kind of hours was quite challenging, having lots of small children. At the same time that was happening, I was also doing some leadership development work. And so I was introduced to coaching. And from the moment I discovered coaching and started doing some coaching really before I really knew what I was doing, I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And just from that moment on, I discovered more and more about coaching, did more training. And then after about 5 years of doing it within my work, I've set up on my own in Australia, really is a way, because in health, it was quite hard to coach within the system. But actually, once I removed myself from the system, I was able to coach and teach coaching sort of in those spaces. So yeah, that was nearly 20 years ago now. So
Wow.
It's been a long passion and just keeps building. And I still get so much joy from all aspects of it. I feel very blessed to have found it.
So you're what we call a seasoned coach, which we were discussing before we started talking about. I said I wasn't keen on that term, but you said that you were quite happy with that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, very experienced coach.
Yeah.
I owe my son's life to some paediatric nurses.
Oh, how lovely.
So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, my son had heart surgery many years ago. So when you say that, my heart goes a little... I go back into a flash of memories of the wonderful care that he received at Great Ormond Street, actually.
Yeah, well, which is where I train.
Oh, is it? Oh.
And it's such a privilege, you know. Coaching is a privilege, but actually being a paediatric nurse was a massive privilege because you are with people at their most vulnerable. And there's quite a lot of parallels, you know, often people bring their most vulnerable place into coaching and into coach supervision actually as well. And again, as a paediatric nurse, you see people absolutely at the most terrifying moment of their lives. So lots of crossover skills and blessing to have been able to do all of them.
Absolutely. Yes. And I was a nurse as well. So we've got quite a lot in common, haven't we?
Yes.
But that's so true. You bring a lot of those skills forward and it is an honour to be in front of people when they're most vulnerable. It really is. I understand that feeling very much. Sorry, you mentioned, Helen, that you found it difficult to coach within the system. Do you want to dive a bit more deeper into what you mean by that? Exactly. What were the struggles that you found in that situation?
I think certainly, and I was working in Australia at that point, but it happens in the NHS as well, and also within education and social care, that people can see the benefit of coaching and they identify that, yes, it would really make a difference for our workforce, but the budgets somehow feel very constrained. So to actually create a role, either a contract role or certainly a permanent role where the work is coaching, was really hard. The budgets just didn't exist. It was always, quite rightly in some ways, prioritised clinical or admin type roles that supported the clinical output. And yet there is a training and learning and development budget. And so what I found when I moved out of the system, that is sad really, but that I was able to get work in the same system. But because I was being paid on a self-employed basis and just on an as-need basis, people were able to commit to it more. Whereas those, like I say, even contract or semi-permanent roles, in my experience, they were very hard or non-existent. And I think what I've seen since coming back to the UK, and I did go back clinically in the NHS for a year during COVID, and I work with a lot of people in those spaces, that there is a lot of support for internal coaching, and they are training people to provide coaching within these organisations. But what they don't do is give them dedicated time. So they're expecting people to carry on with a kind of full-time clinical load or their full-time, whatever their role is, and just find time to coach on top of that. And that's really challenging. And so for me, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be able to give my energy to coaching if that's what I was doing, or give my energy to a clinical role if that's what I was doing, and not just fit coaching in. So by stepping out, it meant that I could do that and I could do the work that I wanted to do.
That's really interesting. I didn't realise that that's what happened. It doesn't totally surprise me, having worked in the NHS education and social care myself, that more does get piled onto you because of the system is so squeezed and pressurised, and the jobs are so squeezed and pressurised, and as you say, budgets as well. Is it humanly possible? Is it okay to be under that pressure?
Exactly. And people are very good at it. You know, everybody who works in those systems are people who want to give back. So they do find a way of doing it but actually often at personal cost. I know plenty of people who go, well, I'll do my coaching in lunchtime, or I'll do a coaching session at 4:30 because I know at the end of the day, maybe I've got a bit of time, or I'll come in and I'll do a coaching session before the phones start ringing. So it's squeezed in that way, and they're putting so much into it and stretching themselves really thin that, in my view, is not sustainable. And it props up a system that's relying on the goodwill of the workforce. And I think we're seeing more and more, we can't do that anymore. With just people have been stretched too much.
Yeah, I mean, many people leave, and I was one of them that had to leave, particularly when you've got other commitments like family, and we all have other commitments. So it's a lot of pressure. It's really interesting to hear from a different perspective, because a lot of the coaches I talk to work in leadership and other executive roles in a corporate basis, but we don't come across that many that work in the area that you're working in. I was just thinking, with what you're saying, is there a role for those people that can't do separate coaching sessions as such within their role? Do they still use those coaching skills in a sort of more leader coach sort of situation? Is that a more manageable place for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's more and more leaders, and within all those organisations, health, social care and education, I think there's been a great acknowledgement in the last sort of 5 to 10 years that coaching as a skill in terms of both leadership and management is really important, but also with clients. So in the health sector, I do quite a lot of teaching health professionals how to use coaching skills with patients. We know it makes a really big difference for lifestyle illnesses and for chronic illness, of how do people manage chronic illness. So sort of things like long COVID, diabetes, heart disease, all of those things, health coaching can massively make a difference. There's also been quite a big investment in health and wellbeing coaches in primary care, again, to support people within the community. And again, in education and social care around how do we support either young people and children, or parents and using coaching skills. So the variety of ways that coaching is used in those organisations, I think, is really broad, and the potential is there. And I think people are starting to see it. So as you say, it's not just the leadership stuff in terms of how do people manage their teams, but it's also how can it change the way we work? Because again, like we were talking about a minute ago, the level of burnout and the dependency that we're sometimes creating within the system that isn't sustainable. And one of the things that I loved when I found coaching as a nurse, I say this quite often, I was really good at fixing people's problems. It was one of
yeah, absolutely.
That's okay, and that's right. But the danger with that is you just get more and more problems to fix until you're like this. And what I love about coaching is the freedom, and I don't take that responsibility. And so helping people let go of that responsibility that's often scaled quite high in people, helping professions to work in partnership with somebody, to support somebody to take responsibility for themselves. And coaching, as we know, is a great, great way to do that. So yeah, lots and lots of different applications for it.
Yeah, it's actually really important as well that it's coaching, not mentoring in that way, because I do see a lot of the problems of the NHS are about dependency and even entitlement, when actually when we, through coaching, can give people agency and an understanding of those inner resources of what changes they can do for themselves, what they're able to do, is a much more effective and powerful way of working.
Yeah, for sure. And that word agency, I use it quite a lot because I think that is one of the keys around coaching, is supporting people's agency. And for me, that's also really critical in those vulnerable populations, that we believe in their agency as coaches before they believe it in themselves. And I love that. Again, that was something that comes from my paediatric nursing days, where I could hold hope for people. And I'd say to parents, your job is just to hold the hope even when things don't look that great. And again, as a coach, there's that holding that hope that actually you can do this. I know it feels hard, but you have the skills. We're going to support you. You're going to support yourself to get there. And I love that word agency. I think that's a really important aspect of coaching.
It was lovely what you said about, particularly with some of those more vulnerable groups or people that have come from different backgrounds, that it might be the first time potentially that that's even come into their thoughts or their vocabulary, maybe, that they can do that, particularly with things like chronic illness, where you feel very powerless.
Exactly.
And helpless and dependent, and to shift that mindset for them to think, well, actually, I can do that.
There is something I can do, something that's going to make a difference, because we know that it's very understandable, but that feeling of hopelessness is really hard. It's such a difficult place to be. And it doesn't, I often talk to people, it doesn't need to shift that much to start spiraling upwards, but it's just that first little shift is the one that requires the most amount of energy. And that's where, as coaches, we can support them and provide that energy when they haven't quite got it on their own. And that's the difference. And a lot of stuff, and I'm sure you hear this and maybe think, it's not rocket science what we do as coaches, and they go, oh, that's so simple when you're there. And it is, but actually it is hard to do on our own. And having somebody else with the energy and the belief really does make a difference for people.
Yeah, and of course, from my experience, having worked in those areas as well, it's also about the staff very much having that mindset as well, because a lot of us who've been nurses are almost addictive fixers.
Yes.
We're so used to resolving things and having to think on our feet and move very fast. And same with doctors, they're kind of in a rescuing mode in many senses. So it's also about changing their mindset as well, because I know with my son, because he's got a disability, I got a lot of messages from medical people that, everything, they gave us this long list of issues he was likely to have. And they went through all this stuff, which I think they thought they were being realistic, which potentially they were. But then what they were doing was cutting off potential. And he actually went past quite a number of goals that they said he wouldn't. And there's always that potential, isn't it? So it's also got to come from the medical side, shifting its mindset and understanding the benefits for both sides.
Yeah. And I think that's coming, but I think it's also, as you say, that people pleasing, that rescuing tendency that many of us who are in helping professions have had reinforced time and time again. And it was interesting, for 3 years, partway through the pandemic, I was privileged enough to be one of the coaches working on what was called the Looking After You coaching service, which was a coaching service for primary care, any primary care staff. So it could be from receptionists through to senior partners, opticians, pharmacists, anybody working in primary care. But one of the themes that kept coming up, and particularly as we've come out of the pandemic, is that agency around, can I do something different? So healthcare has moved, particularly primary care. The expectations and how they've delivered primary care has shifted massively in the last 5 years. And so for a lot of people working in primary care, actually there's still a grief around, how come I can't do it the way I used to do it? I want to be able to work the way that I did when I had 10-minute appointments where I could see everybody face to face, those kind of ways, and actually realizing I need to process that grief, but also thinking about, even though I'm overwhelmed because I just have so many patients to see, the pressure is so high, what can I actually do to shift things for myself? Because the system can feel so overwhelming as well. So I think there are lots of ways that even individuals that we might look at externally and think, they know what they're doing, they're really bright, they're really smart, they're juggling, they're high achievers, are still struggling with this, actually, what can I do to make this situation different?
Yeah. Have you come across many staff that have got, the symptoms of PTSD, for instance, after things like the pandemic? Because that was a traumatic event, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a psychologist, so I suppose I don't feel like I'm in a position to diagnose, but I think there definitely is some ongoing trauma. And the other place that I see that quite a bit, I do a lot of work with social workers and social workers at different levels of the system. And we talk about vicarious trauma. So they're listening, they're dealing with significant things within a child's family, and that cumulative effect of either the healthcare system and the pandemic and the things that people saw there, or just that little bit time and time again and again in education as well. They are very much at the front line of a lot of these safeguarding issues and seeing families really struggling, and that same sense of helplessness of, I've got 30 kids, I know I'm not able to meet all of their needs. I know these families are really struggling, but I'm being assessed, I'm being viewed in this very tick box, for want of a better word, way. And so I think all of those people have the potential to experience trauma, whether it's quite as much as PTSD that I'm less experienced with, of saying it's definitely there. But I think there is vicarious trauma across all of those professions, for sure.
And listening to you, firstly, I can really feel how much you really care about what you do. And that must come very much with your clients, that they feel that from you. So that's a really lovely thing to hear and feel. But also, from all the things you've said, actually coaching in these areas is really needed.
Oh, it's hugely needed. And that's one of the frustrations, quite a lot of work I've been doing over the last year or so, like the Looking After You service, the funding didn't continue. In social care, there's a very large national leadership programme. The funding was pulled at very short notice. And so I think that's something that we really have to acknowledge ourselves as coaches, the frustration that we feel and our kind of emotions around. It's so needed. We know it makes a difference. We hear that. I see that for people. And yet it's still underfunded. It still gets pulled it's the earliest thing to get pulled. They can't afford to pay for it themselves. Most of those professions haven't got the financial stability to be able to invest it in themselves. And it's so short-sighted. We know, you were talking about the dropout rate. We know the difference it makes. The Looking After You service and a massive evaluation, looking at retention and intention to leave. And 4 or 5 coaching sessions that were 45 minutes or 30 minutes, the follow-up sessions, we shifted things by about 20%, which is when you think about the NHS, and again, if you do something similar in education and in social care, all of those spaces are struggling, to recruit and particularly to retain more experienced practitioners. There's a churn and burn. And coaching, we know, helps that. Those people-pleasing tendencies that we were talking about and how difficult it is around boundaries, if we can support people early on to start thinking about that before their boundaries have got really slippery and they're suddenly working 12, 14-hour days, logging on a Sunday night to clear their emails before they start the week. Unless we start shifting that culture, we are going to continue to support people to burn out. And we know coaching makes a difference. So I find it's one of my things, again, that I get really passionate about and really frustrated about, but feel very privileged when I do get to do that work.
Yeah, I'm so glad we've got you on as a guest actually to spread that message, and for some coaches out there to think about whether this is an area they would like to reach into. I mean, it's particularly more poignant for you because having worked in those systems yourself, you can see it from both sides, which is important to have that empathy and understanding to some degree, which must come out in some of your training as well when you're doing training.
Just on that point, I think there is something about having, and I think it's something as coaches we struggle with in terms of having experience in a way, authenticity and credibility in a particular context versus we know as coaches we can coach anybody. It actually doesn't make any difference. We don't need to understand that. And I think we can get caught up around that. But what I hear and what I know is that there is something, if you're in a particular profession or particular context, as a coachee, they often feel more confident and comfortable straight away with somebody who does speak their language and has some experience in that context. So I think that's a real balance for all of us as coaches, because I want to go, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I'm a healthcare background when someone's quizzing me around what my background is in order for me to coach them. And as a coach supervisor, I'm like, yeah, but we can coach anybody. So I think we don't always name that. And I think that is quite, because it's relevant whether you come from finance or pharma or wherever you come from into coaching, there's that tension between those two viewpoints.
It makes me think actually of, we had a podcast last year when we were doing about coaching women, and in one of the episodes we were talking with Ngozi, and so there was also Ngozi Lynn Cole, there was also an issue about coaches really needing to listen to people from other cultures, so giving them the space to tell their story, not skipping over it, not trying to minimise it, not trying to jump in with jumping straight into goals, but giving those people a chance, particularly if you're not from that culture. So to give that listening time and to let them tell their story as they need to. Maybe there's a bit of that for those coaches that don't have a healthcare background to at least come in with that mindset of, I have no idea what it's like to do this job, and give people the space to just talk a little bit. Is that a good thing to do?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's true, as you say, for any coaching engagement. I often start the first coaching call, what do you want me to know about you? Because on the first coaching time that we meet someone, they might not want us to know everything about them. So it's about, what do you want me to know about you now? And as we work with them, we obviously hear and pick up more things. The other thing that I've learned from my work with social workers, because it wasn't a term I was familiar with until I worked in that space, is something called social graces, which is around kind of our intersectionality. It's an acronym and I can't remember all of it. For example, sex, education, religion, or gender, all of those kind of things. And I think that I've become much clearer around articulating mine, naming differences, and what do I need to know as a coach that's going to help me coach you in a way that works for you. And that, for me, is important about difference. It's also, as people are more aware of their individual neurodiversity, thinking about, okay, if you have a particular need, it might be that you need to turn your camera off because you're on screen the whole time. It may be that you've got audio processing. It might be that you're speaking a second language. All sorts of ways that we might need to adapt our coaching to be the right coach and coach in a way that suits the individual. But I agree with you. I think it's on us as the coach to ask those questions, to ask, what do we need to be? What are the differences? What's important for me to know about you? And it might be, as you say, what's important for me to know about the context. Again, there's a tension there, isn't there, around somebody just telling you story and using the time that's not actually helping them move forward in thinking. But certainly on a first session, I would want to spend some time on that.
Yeah, and then again, that's another coaching skill that comes into play. When you see someone going into a story, you learn those things, don't you, as you go on. The energy almost drops in the room a bit when someone's going a bit too much into their story. And it's not to their advantage, you can feel it. It's kind of almost pulling the things down a little bit. So there are ways to learn those skills if you don't have them, or just become aware of that.
For sure, and something that I've added, and I think Claire Norman probably needs credit for it because she names it in her book, but around, I now contract to interrupt. And so I talk to people beforehand on when I'm contracting around the difference between story that's for me, my benefit, and story where they're getting understanding and moving themselves forward in thinking. And I think for coaches, I didn't know that early on in my coaching career where we were kind of taught never interrupt, and it's something I've had to shift on. So definitely.
Yes, some really great advice in everything you've said, Helen. So I'm sure some of our listeners will be going, oh, yes, that's a good point. And I think it's also even in that to know that it's okay that we make mistakes along that journey, you know, and you can backtrack and be honest with clients. Look, I think I cut you off a bit too soon then. You know, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share some more if you'd like to. There's ways, isn't there? It's just about being, like you say, honest and sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody gets it right all the time. You know, we all make mistakes and that's okay. In our coaching, what we want to do is acknowledge the mistake in the smallest way possible and put it back onto the thinking. What I possibly used to do was go, oh, that was a bad question, and I've asked multiple questions, and I just kept taking up more and more airtime in my apology, when it's like, we all make mistakes and move on, because it's got to get back to the coachee. It's not about me, and those mistakes and that kind of stuff, that needs to be processed in my supervision, not in the coaching call with my client. Easier said than done.
Yeah, that's a really good example of how you can, like you say, suck the air out with your own apology. Yeah. So, really helpful. So, Helen, what does your working week look like? How do you divide it up, or is it different week to week?
It's very different week to week. It tends to go a little bit on the academic year. So that sort of is a bit of a rhythm, I suppose, because quite a lot of my work does go from September, October through June, July. And my actual week varies between individual coaching with different clients, supervision, so either individual supervision or group supervision. And then depending, there might be some training in there. And then I try and make sure I've got business development time. So for my own marketing and the day-to-day admin, as well as thinking about my own supervision, my own learning and development. So it's a busy week. And each one looks different. And that's what I love about being self-employed. It's not the same. My hours of work vary quite considerably. I take annual leave. I sometimes try and keep Fridays free, but not always. So it really depends, I guess, on what workers come in. But it's a mixture of all of those things.
And of course, you've been going for quite a long time now. When you first started coaching, I imagine your week wasn't always full.
No. Definitely not. I guess when I first started coaching, I had kids who kept me busy. My kids were quite little at that stage, and I didn't really know where to start. So I did do a lot of networking, going and talking to people about how they'd established a coaching business, what had worked for them, any tips. I wasn't afraid to meet with people who I'd never met and say, what would you say to me? What's the most helpful thing? And I got all sorts of great insights and advice. I think I was just on a call not that long ago, and we were talking about the difference between busy work and effective work. And I think as an early coach, I did quite a lot of busyness. Coming from nursing, where, you know, your day is really busy. You're lucky to find time to go to the toilet, never mind have lunch. And so I kept myself very busy. And what I mean by busy work might be things like, which are important but not critical early on, sort of setting up your website. And I'm old, so, you know, the days of a business card and, you know, that kind of stuff, which is kind of in a way the icing rather than the actual substance. So there were times that, and there are still times now, you know, as I said, quite a lot of my work has changed in the last 12 months. So I went from being basically fully booked out to now having more time in my diary. And that can be quite scary. You suddenly start doubting yourself and thinking, am I good enough? Have I just been lucky? Yes, I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, but gosh, is that, you know, the imposter syndrome, I was right all along. I'm now being found out. And so I think that's useful to name, that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. We all have those peaks and troughs and periods where there isn't that much work. And we do have to think about, what do I spend my time on? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important question to ask, but it's quite a hard question to answer. And it's so individual depending on what your priorities are, what you think is important. For me at the moment, I am focusing more on marketing that I've never really had to do before, and also accreditation. So I've been accredited for a while, but I'm now getting the higher level accreditations, but actually across multiple coaching bodies, which seems a bit strange, but for me, I actually wanted to compare and contrast. And for my supervision practice, it made sense to say, okay, actually, I want to understand the ICF. I want to understand the Association for Coaching. And I'm also involved in the Universal Coaching Alliance. So being able to compare those things. But that's the answer for me, that was what I wanted to use this little bit of space that I had in my diary. But I think coaches early on need to really be asking that question. What am I trying to achieve, and what's the work that's going to get me there? And making sure that they're focusing on what the actions are rather than the outcomes. In supervision and discussing with coaches, because often people will come and go, oh, they didn't make the changes that they said they were going to. They just didn't follow through, and this level of frustration. And that must mean I'm a really bad coach because they haven't made the change that I thought they could. And separating ourselves as the coach and being responsible for what we're responsible for within the coaching and not taking responsibility for the outcome. And again, when we think about our coaching business, I think that's important as well, that we need to focus on what are the steps I'm taking to build my coaching business, not seeing success as I've got 6 new clients or I've signed that contract or whatever, because we don't necessarily have direct control. We know if we pay attention to what needs to be done, it will potentially come, but we can't control it straight away.
Yeah, Helen, that's really great tips. In fact, for those of you listening who don't have a coaching supervisor, you might get the idea that it's quite a good idea to have one, because if you listen to Helen,
I might be biased, but yes,
I can tell that you've got that thinking, that supervisor's thinking, the way you're speaking. So we'll go into maybe ask you more questions about that in a minute, but you kind of mentioned some challenges there for a coaching business and having to deal with the troughs. What other challenges do you face?
Oh, that's a big question. A big question. Where do I start? I think one of the challenges that we all face once we've finished our coach training is, are we good enough? And we all have sessions where you think, oh my goodness, when we're learning to be a coach, we're observed. We get feedback. If we go through an accreditation, we look at transcripts and we get feedback. But once we're not in that stage, it's just us and the client. And we can do whatever we like. And I think all of us have sessions you think, oh, far out, what happened there? I'm so glad nobody was in the room with me because I wasn't coaching, or I got sidetracked, or I wasn't quite clear where the boundary was, or I got into mentoring you talked about, or teaching, or my stuff. And so I think that's quite hard to have a session or a client where you're just like, oh, it just didn't feel quite right, or I'm a bit embarrassed because I know I wasn't quite coaching at my best. And so I think that's hard because we don't get that direct feedback unless we invest in mental coaching when someone's watching our recordings. But even then, we choose which recordings we would take if we were doing mental coaching. So there's a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty about what happens within our coaching. And that can really lead to this, am I good enough? I need to work harder. I need to do more. I need to do more. And all of that takes us away from coaching presence, from actually being the best coach. If we're focused on, oh, I need to ask this question, or I need to stay silent, and we tense up like this, and it takes us away from being with our clients. So I think that's a real challenge of answering that question, am I good enough? Because the honest answer is none of us really know. And we only take to supervision what we want to take, and I often say to people I supervise, what are you avoiding bringing? What do you not want to bring to supervision? Because that's actually
great question.
What we want. But you have to build up a connection with a supervisor. It's a bit like coaching. You're not going to take the most vulnerable parts of yourself in the first session, or most people don't. You need to build up trust to be able to take the bits where you're like, oh, I really want to avoid this. The other thing I think is really common, and certainly I experience it, we are great listeners as coaches. And we have talked about that vulnerability and authenticity. And what that means is our clients bring their emotions. And coaches are really good at sitting with emotions and working with emotions and hearing the stories that have got people there. And again, you were asking that around kind of health and social care and education. But when we hear people's vulnerabilities and their emotions, they can be left with us. As human beings, emotions are catching. And so again, as coaches, we're pretty good at separating. But if that's happening time and time again, often we find that we are holding on either to the story or the client that we're worried about, or the emotions that have come up within those sessions. And again, thinking about how do we look after ourselves? How do we process those emotions? How do we let them go because they've served their purpose in order to carry on coaching at the level that we are and being present for clients? And I think that's something that maybe we don't talk about as much, that there is an emotional impact for us as coaches when we hear what our clients are going through. And it's possibly underplayed a bit. So for me, that's another challenge that I have to think about.
Yeah, they're all really good points. And it brings up 3 words for me: self-reflection, self-care and self-compassion.
I love them all. I'm a big believer in all of them, funnily enough.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something I've had to learn the hard way with the different careers I've had, where it's been a lot of giving to people. So I really hold those things. And that's what I heard from what you were saying. But also what I heard from you is the fact that this is why supervision actually is so helpful. So would you just like to share a bit more about that? Because we've had this in many coaching conversations in our podcast where it comes up a lot, where people say that supervision is the thing that keeps them going. Supervision is the place where they grow most. Supervision is the place where they feel held and where it's their time to let go, as you say, rather than be giving. So what for you do you think is so key that coaches have supervision?
I think it's all 3 of those things that you talked about in terms of self-reflection, self-compassion and self-care. And I think the first 2 are probably the really key things that supervision is for. And a bit like we were talking earlier about coachees struggle to kind of believe in themselves or struggle to do this work on their own, we can be self-reflective and we can be self-compassionate on our own. We don't need a supervisor to do it. But what I would say in my experience, both for myself and clients that I work with, that when we do it on our own, we do this much. So we do a small amount. When we do it in combination with somebody else, we do this much. Because the role of a supervisor is to challenge you to go further.
Just for the listeners, Helen, you used your hands, in a small way, and then you said this much as in a much bigger way.
Much bigger way, like a 10-fold increase, if not more. And the reason that is, I talk about coaching, but I also talk about supervision for myself as one of the things that I do is that I'm your cheerleader, but I have a velvet boot. And what I mean by that is you've got this, you're amazing, but I'm going to kick you gently. That's why it's velvet, to go further than you can go on your own. And particularly in those moments of self-doubt, it's really easy to go, if we're thinking about that particular session that didn't go that well, everything was bad about it. I'm just going to forget about it. I'm a terrible coach. And we don't actually do the work to go, okay, well, what bits were okay? And where was it that it started to get out of hand? How do you really unpick that? Was that the type of client? Did they remind you of somebody? Was it the issue they brought? An issue that you've heard time and time and time again, and you've gone, yeah, I know how to coach around burnout, do this all the time. Then you're going off on your agenda. And that self-compassion around, am I good enough? That's where the self-compassion comes in. And so within supervision, what you should be doing is the supervisor working with you to help you unpick that, but also be more balanced. We all know as humans, we have a negative bias. And so all of us as coaches are really great at that self-reflection from a critical point of view. We are less good, and I ask all my clients, whether they're coaching or whether I'm supervising them, what would you like to celebrate? What's gone well? Because we need that balance. What we feed and water is what grows. And so that self-compassion and that self-reflection, we want to take the learning, but we also want to feed and water what's already working, what makes you great as a coach. And a supervisor should help you be able to articulate that and help you see that for yourself. Just like coaching, we're not creating dependency in between times, in between supervision. You can remind yourself, oh yeah, this is what I'm good at. This is what makes me amazing. Oh, look, I did a bit of that. I want to do more of that. And again, when we have good sessions that we can actually unpick and work out what it was that made that session really good and how do we get more of that.
That's wonderful.
I don't know whether I answered your question there, Maxine. I went on.
No, you did. I was just thinking there's probably a couple of people listening at least thinking, how can I get Helen O'Grady as my supervisor? Because it was really well said. I was thinking, how do you take care of yourself, Helen, with all this? If you're not taking on clients, but you're supporting coaches as well. So how do you care for yourself?
You won't be surprised to hear that I'm in lots of supervision. So I'm really lucky. I work 2/3 supervisors. I do some individual supervision. I'm part of a group supervision, and that's absolutely critical for me. So I have supervision for my coaching, but also supervision for my supervision, and also mentor coaching to help me really look at my own coaching practice as well. So lots of professional development ways to do that. I'm also involved in community practices. So I'm involved in 2 different ones where we just get together with peers and we might do peer coaching and give feedback, or we might just be talking about challenges, or we might be learning. Somebody might bring a tool or something that they want to share with the group and try out in that space. So there's that side of things. I'm a big believer in holidays. So I'm very lucky that one of the things I do as being a self-employed person is I do schedule quite a bit of time away and weekends away and do things like that. And I know that that's what I need. That's what gives me joy, that change of perspective, but also switching off again. You and I were discussing before the call about work-life balance. Actually, that's not great because, as you can hear, hopefully, I'm very passionate about this work. So it does kind of all consume me, and that's okay. So I find that fully switching off by going away is important. And I try and fit exercise and that kind of stuff in as well. So, and I spend a lot of time with family and friends. So lots of different ways. But I know that I do sometimes get that wrong. And the danger for me is when I'm really busy, when it's the mirroring between our clients, when I've got lots of paid work, it's so easy to push the things that are for ourselves down the pile. I'll do that when the work quietens down. What I know is if I don't prioritise, particularly supervision and looking after myself, I am a less good coach and I'm a less good supervisor. And actually that matters to me because I feel very strongly, having come from a regulated profession, feel really passionately about being a professional coach. And that means I have to take adult responsibility and self-responsibility for looking after myself to be the best coach and the best supervisor I can be. But I'll put my hand up and say, I don't always get that right. And sometimes I need to talk to myself, remind myself to follow through on the things that matter to me.
It's interesting what you said about coming from a regulated background, because I have a similar thing where I bring that forward and I bring that ethical stance. As a nurse, it's so ingrained into you, and then I can see the importance of it. So yeah, we're actually having a conversation very soon. I'm sorry, I can't remember the date, but it might have been gone now, but it'll be on our website. We're having a live discussion about whether to regulate or not regulate the coaching profession.
I think that's next week. I had signed up for it, but somebody's booked into my diary.
Yeah, November, because this recording will be coming out, Helen, after that's gone, but that would have been in November, but it will still be on our website. But it's a very, I think, hot topic coming up because coaching is diving a bit deeper these days. People's problems are taking us that way as well, and coaching is evolving.
For sure.
So there is that question of regulation, which I'd love to talk to you about, but I'm just aware of time. So I'm going to probably nip that in the bud, but it definitely is something for the coaching profession to be thinking about in the way that coaching's going.
Definitely, I agree.
But I think it is also a useful thing when you come from that background that you carry with you into coaching conversations. You know, I've done so much safeguarding training myself, and all those things are in the room. But whatever experience you bring, because a lot of coaches come into it from another profession, you're bringing something forward, aren't you?
Definitely.
And you've been so passionate about coaching and supervision. So in a way, this question feels a bit weird because it's been kind of obvious in some ways that you love coaching very much. And you've highlighted through your conversation why you do. But would you like to specifically say, what is it you love most about coaching? What is it of things you see day to day that keep you going?
It's such a privilege to have this deep connection and to really listen to somebody. And it's so easy to underplay. In terms of, when I'm teaching coaching, I quite often joke and say, I love being a coach because I get paid to do very little. Because really good coaching, we're not actually doing that much, but what we are doing is highly, highly skillful. And that's really listening to somebody and asking questions that's going to help them move forward in their thinking. And so that's what gives me joy, is seeing somebody step into their wonderfulness And that for me is both in coaching and coach supervision. I'm really passionate about helping people be their best. And I love walking that journey in whatever way. And I think, again, related to what we were talking about earlier, what I love about coaching and coach supervision compared to when I was a nurse is being able to do that without taking the responsibility on. So it's that shared responsibility. I'm really clear about my part in it, but I don't now take responsibility for the outcome. And so that means when somebody makes a shift, I can absolutely help them celebrate for themselves because they have made the shift. Yes, the coaching has enabled it or the supervision has enabled it, but they've done the work. So it's very, very authentic in that way of going, you're amazing. Look what you've done. Look at the difference it's making in your life. And it is walking alongside somebody, and it's a privilege. I just say it time and time again because it's what I feel, that we ask such personal questions. We ask people to be so vulnerable and so go so deep in a coaching conversation or in supervision. And I don't take that lightly. I often will say to clients, thank you so much for trusting me. The kind of space I work in, we often don't get chemistry calls. We just go straight in. They're allocated a coach. And if there's a problem, they can change coach. But basically, they're stuck with me. And so that trust that somebody shows to tell you the things that they are struggling with or the stuff that they haven't said to anybody else blows my mind, and I love it, and I see the difference it makes, and I feel very privileged to be part of this profession that's able to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, good coaching is life-changing, hey?
It really is.
Let's tell people where they can reach you if they'd like to contact you.
Probably the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. So it's Helen O'Grady on LinkedIn. And I'm hoping the link can go in relation to this. Otherwise, Helen O'Grady Consulting. So there's a website and you can book in a call if there's something that interests you. I run group supervisions and also individual supervisions and obviously coaching. So it would be fabulous to talk to anybody about any of those things.
Yeah, lovely. Yes, we'll put the links in the show notes without question. So as we leave, Helen, is there any final pearls of wisdom you'd like to share with our listeners?
That's a great question. That's often how I finish my coaching is, what final words of wisdom would you like to give yourself? So let me turn that on the head. I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm feeling that wise, but what I would say is trust yourself. It's the most common feedback I give to coaches. And I think it's also true for coaching clients as well, is trust and believe in yourself. And if you're struggling with that, find somebody to work with who will support you to trust and believe in yourself, because that's where the magic happens.
Thank you. Helen, honestly, it's been a wonderful conversation full of rich gems of information and your passion and your care for what you do. So it's been lovely to have you as a guest. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Maxine. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.